Hey, what's going on, guys? Today we're taking a look at a Mook here, which is very fitting for the current era because this is a beginner's guide all about the Witch from Mercury. So this is from Hobby Japan. This is a Hobby Japan Mook. Not necessarily very large, but it's going to be all focused on beginner's guide tips specifically for the Witch from Mercury kits, which are quite popular at the moment. So it's easy to see why they would put this out, trying to capitalize on the popularity of the series at the moment. But it should be pretty interesting. Let's go ahead and see what they've got in store for us in this one. So like I said, guys, this one does not actually have like the hard binding on the side. It's just like kind of your magazine kind of staple on there. So it's not going to be quite as thick. This one goes to, let's see, page 82 there in length. The list price on this one, 1,100 yen though, so the price reflects it. It's only about 10 bucks for this. Normally it'd be, 15, 20, something like that. Right here on the cover, of course, we've got the Gundam Ariel, and this logo right here, in case any of you guys are unfamiliar, that's like the beginner. So you'll see this on a lot of cars and stuff. If you look at videos from Japan and things like that, people will put that sticker on their car to show that they're a beginner driver, that they're a new driver. So that's what this logo is like. That's the beginner logo is what that means. That's why this on this book, because it's going to be beginner tips. So here we got this issue of Extra, which if I remember correctly, I believe I did get this. Yes, I do. I have that over here. That's in the queue. So we'll take a look at this issue later on. I believe that one is also like a Gunpla beginner's guide. If you're wondering why a lot of these MOOCs are focused on beginners, it's just because that kind of stuff is easier to put into books like this. It's kind of easier to, sell products essentially to people, different tools and paints and supplies, introduce people to different products that they can use. Generally once people become a bit more experienced, they have less of a reliance on stuff like this to teach them how to do things. And there's a lot of different kind of media that actually is very informative, YouTube videos and stuff particular. So it'll be interesting to see if they do keep coming out with books like this. But they have been pretty consistently putting out different beginners books, even with the rise of popularity of YouTube videos and things like that where people can get, honestly, a lot of the same information. But still, there's always interesting tips and tricks to find here in these MOOCs. So even if you're not a beginner, these books are still interesting to look through because you might find some interesting ideas in here. So, all right, let's get into it. I was just gonna say here while I was kind of ranting if there's any kind of table of contents, but I think, there is. Here is some table of contents. I just kind of glossed over, but let's just get right into it here, working on the Gundam Ariel. So looks like the first tips are just kind of about, how to cut and remove the nub marks. That's all pretty standard on the clear parts here as well. You do have to be a little bit extra careful with that. The flags on the V-fin there, for example, so cut that, leaving a little bit, cut it down a little bit more with your knife, and then I would also add this step of sanding that with a sanding stick. They're not really including any sanding in this step. Here's the tools that are used, just nipper, knife, tweezers, and then Gundam markers essentially, but especially for the V-fin, I would highly recommend using sanding sticks for that rather than sandpaper. Is too it'll round it. You need to keep it pretty straight and flat. And just because that's very thin, I would not really recommend using a file unless you feel pretty comfortable with a file. A file can, do too much, take off too much too quick. Anyway, it looks like using a kind of bluish or blue kind of purplish Real Touch marker there for the panel lining for that. So it's another kind of nice tip, just a reminder that, for panel lining, you don't have to stick with just black for everything or even gray. You can use colors, and especially if it like goes with the color of the mobile suit. That kind of dark bluish, purplish kind of color really fits well with the design, especially on these blue parts right here. For the yellow parts, it looks like they probably use like a brown or a dark red, something like that, or maybe that's that red one, kind of orange color there maybe, I guess. So yeah, use your colors. That's why it's good to have some, if you do your panel lining with markers, or if you do it with paints, whatever the case may be, to have some different colors on hand to do your panel lining. You shouldn't necessarily, sometimes you can, but don't necessarily just do all your panel lining on a single kit all in one color. You can kind of use multiple colors for panel lining depending on what the color of the part is, the base color of the plastic, whatever. Here's kind of interesting, showing about panel lining inside this little vent here, and you can see the marker kind of went out. And so in order to clean up that line, it's using a knife to scrape that. That's something that I've shown in a video before in the past. Kind of controversial. It seems like some people kind of really get up in arms about that you shouldn't do that. You definitely can do it. You have to be just very careful with it though. Because obviously you're scraping the plastic with a knife, very easy to damage it, and it's just going to look worse. But if you do it carefully, you can do it just fine, and you can clean up your marker. That said, You can also easily do that just with like a toothpick, especially if it's just Panaline marker. Usually cleans up pretty well. Just get a toothpick, and sometimes if you just make the toothpick a little bit wet, even with just water, and just kind of use that to just kind of scrape away that marker, it should work. Otherwise, you can use an eraser or lots of other different tools. So, okay, I better move on. Otherwise, we're not going to make it through this whole thing. It's going to be like an hour-long video or more if I'm going into too much detail about every single little step here. But as you guys can see, another thing here that it looks like it's recommending is, testing the marker when you're using like a Gundam marker, a pour type paint marker. Let some paint out before you just put it directly right on the part. You're going to touch it on there, and you could, and not always necessarily, you'll just get a bunch of paint suddenly just rush out of there. So touch it onto just here. It's just recommending on like the part of the runner. Or you could just do it on a paper towel or napkin or tissue, whatever, just to let some of the paint out, or just a piece of paper. Just so that you kind of know how the paint is flowing first before you start putting it on the actual part. But this is just filling in some gray details around on some of the kit with just a pour type gray Gundam marker there. It looks nice, I gotta say, it looks pretty good. Here we have the finished results. This one looks like, I'm just trying to see what that is. Looks like that's the sticker, so just putting the sticker on there. So pretty straightforward with that. You can see some kind of before and after images here, kind of comparing the look of that. Like for example, here on the back of the shield, they colored in those parts at the top gray. Definitely looks a lot nicer there, so that's pretty cool. Now we're getting into some actual painting here, using some paints, it looks like, and some markers, and some brushes, and tweezers, and that looks like kind of about it. Okay, so this is kind of introducing how to remove the seam line. So this is the seam on the inner part of the shoulder. It's kind of, you can't really see it in this photo, it's kind of behind the shield, but the inner part of that shoulder armor right there, there is a small seam. So just using cement to glue that, and then you can just sand it down, and then you have no more seam, easy. Once again, just kind of about removing, okay, this is exactly like what I was saying before. For the flag on the V-fin, cut it with the nippers, cut it down a little bit with a knife, and then use a sanding stick to get it really sharp. That's kind of how I've found to be the best way to sharpen your V-fin. If you want it really, really super sharp and like you're really wanting to shape it, then I would, recommend using a file. But if you're just trying to remove the flag, then the best way to go is just with a sanding stick, I think. So, all right, some more paint lining here and real touch marker on there. It looks like some more, okay, this is painting in, so like the inside of the parts. This is something I've talked about a lot in different videos and things like, looks like the inside of the shoulder armor, the inside of certain armor areas, painting it in just with a brush. And in this case, I mean, you could do it with a Gundam marker. I feel like it would be kind of difficult to do with a Gundam marker. It's easier to do with a brush because you can kind of fit the brush into these recessed areas, but in behind some of these armor pieces so that it gives you more of illusion. So like anywhere where you can see in behind the parts, if you're just seeing like the backside of a piece of white plastic, it doesn't look as good as if you fill that in with like a dark gray. Typically like German gray is really good for that because it's very dark. It's like almost black, but it's not quite black, so it's not too stark in contrast. Anyway, so just using a brush to just paint in some of the details. Instead of the Gundam marker, they're just using a brush to paint in some gray for some of those gray details. Painting the eyes here with a metallic green. Doing some panel line cleanup just with the Q-tip here on these yellow parts for the backpack, I believe that is. Some more brush painting here. A little bit, it's going to be a bit more difficult to paint that white directly on top of the blue, I feel like. So that's something that's going to be a bit more challenging to do, and that's where primer certainly comes in handy for painting white on top of a color like that. But we'll see here if we can see in like the finished results how that looks. Looks like there's not too many photos of the finished results for this one, but here's also about using a little bit of a plot plate and like a detail part inside there for the inside of the rifle rather than like what's stock on the inside of there. Some waterside decals there as well. Kind of very quickly, it's a very small section about waterside decals. I know for beginners a lot of times waterside decals can be a bit intimidating, and they're kind of very quickly glossing over it, but it is fairly straightforward. Waterside decals thing, it can be intimidating I guess at first, but once you start you'll find it's quite simple. More kind of about nub cleanup here, sanding mold lines on parts, like on the elbow joint you'll have a mold line there, so just sanding that to get a nicer finish on that. Rescribing out your panel lines if you're sanding a bit too heavily on some different areas, like there on the V-fin, you can rescribe that panel line out a bit. Again, like I was talking about, that we saw briefly some photos. So I guess maybe we'll see some more photos of this a little bit kind of later on here, it looks like, possibly. But this is just more about the modification to the gun that we saw on the previous page. for the gun barrel. Here's kind of just like an introduction to airbrushing. So a few just kind of like basic airbrush tips, like how to get started airbrushing. And it looks like we're going to be airbrushing these parts here, which are the parts for the backpack, it looks like, and our yellow parts, painting them in a kind of more orangish tone kind of color there. Spraying some top coat on there. It looks like some more seam removal. Seam has been removed there on that part of the knee there as well. Some more airbrushing, looks like. Here's that part like I was talking about before, that they brush painted the white on top of the blue there. Going in, adding some more white on top of that after masking some sections there, it looks like. Here's some panel lining done with just enamel paint, which is how I used to only ever do this, just doing your panel lining with enamel paint. I have gotten a bit more lazy and I just use the panel line accent color a lot of times whenever possible, but definitely I feel like this is still probably the best way to do your panel lining, just with thinned down enamel paint. It just takes a little bit more work, but it doesn't have the convenience of the panel line accent color, but it does still, I think, give you the best results because it gives you the most control over anything that allows you to have the most control over your paint is going to be the best way to go. So a little bit here just kind of about photography as well, which is really nice. So just kind of some general posing tips. So you want to have the chin down, but the head kind of towards the back. You want to have the chest kind of pointed down a little bit, the shoulders back, the knees straight, and the legs straight like that. And have your angles kind of all right. So here's just kind of about lighting, having the lighting right, your levels and everything. And here's kind of a bit more dynamic posing guide there. And just using a simple kind of photo box. You can buy these for pretty cheap online, and just like a light ring, an LED light ring also can be pretty cheap. You can find those at like dollar stores and things like that, some like really, really cheap ones. But it could certainly do the job just to get you some nice, decent photographs of your kits. All right, so here's the Gundam Aerial, Mirasol, and plus the Mirasol flight unit, right? So this is the finished product here. You can see some photos now how this looks. Yeah, it looks really nice. I mean, considering that it's not fully painted, it's basically just, with a little bit of detail and it's a little bit of paint on some of the parts. But as you can see, it looks really good. The Gundam Lefrith is up next here, so let's see what we're going to be doing with this one. Does look pretty cool just from these first couple images there. I'm not sure. Let's see, are we going to get some... Oh, not really. Okay, so it looks like we're not going to have a whole lot of work in progress photos on this. But I would imagine probably it's just kind of taking a lot of the same steps and things that we did with the previous kit and now apply that onto the Lefrith as well. Here's an example of the results that you can get just with taking similar steps here on the Lefrith, which looks awesome. So let's just see if there's anything too much more to kind of glean from the few work in progress photos that we have. Not necessarily. There's probably some more information that would be interesting there in the text, but without going and taking the time to translate all that text right now at the moment, just gonna kind of just pass by that, just admire the looks of it for a moment, and we'll move on here to Choo-Choo's Demi Trainer. This one also looks very nice. So you can see the base kit like just built up out of box compared with our painted build here. So this one does look to be fully painted, and I would assume this one is also airbrushed. It looks like we do have some modification here to this as well, like a little bit of scratch building done here on the inside of the shield to make just kind of a little bit more interesting, a little bit more substantial looking connection piece for that, because if I remember correctly, the connection piece for the shield is just like a little like round like cylinder shaped circles and just pops on there. So it looks like he just like built this, essentially it's just like a little box, like a little trapezoid box made out of plot plate. So pretty simple to build and definitely will look nicer than just what was there on the kit already. So that's pretty good. Added a little metal piece here inside the tip of the gun barrel to give a little bit better detail right there as well, and also some detail on, it looks like, well, it's kind of hard to tell if there's detail parts added on the top of the gun as well or not, but it looks like, oh, this is really interesting. See, this is why, even if you're an experienced modeler, looking at these magazines for beginners can be helpful, because this is really, really cool. I never would have thought of this. So the underside of the feet has this hollow space in it, and so rather than like, I mean, I've seen a million different ways about like how to fill the details on the inside of the feet. I've never seen this done before, or I've never noticed that I've seen it. Maybe have seen it, but I didn't know. So what he did was saw a hole saw like a gap in the side of the foot, so hopefully you guys can kind of see that. I'm gonna bring this up so I can show you guys properly, but you can see sawed a gap, which I think this would be kind of the most difficult part to do, and you'd have to do it really carefully. And make sure that it's a straight line, and make sure that the thickness is right, so then you can take a piece, and it looks like it's just like maybe 0.5 or 1 millimeter thick plot plate. So you took a piece of plot plate, scribed his lines in it, and then so that plot plate can just slot into there, and then that makes the internal detail. And then once you cut that off around the outside, and you know, you'll have to glue and putty that a little bit on the outside to get it to look smooth on the outside, but that plot plate that you've stuck in, that you've slotted in there to fill in, it will also fill the gap that you made with the saw. And then you've got detail on the inside, and you can just clean up the outside. That's a really cool idea. I really like that. And I mean, it wouldn't necessarily work for all different types of feet, but it's certainly something to think about as an interesting technique for filling that kind of gap in a kit. So that's really cool. I like that. He also added some plot plate here, it looks like on the inside of like the back half of the torso. Really cool. All right, Gules de Lanza here. Let's see what we've got for this. Well, I can see right away he did some extra work here on the feather. It looks like basically he just put a layer of, well, I'm not sure. Is the whole entire thing just putty? No, I don't think so. I think you just put like a thin layer of epoxy putty over the top of the feather part, and then you can like just scratch it or whatever, make your detail lines in it to make it look very feathery. Basically just to make the part look more detailed. So just by adding some epoxy putty on there, and then I would assume it's epoxy putty. Actually, I'm not too entirely sure, but that's what it looks like anyway. And then just, yeah, make your lines in it to make it look more of like a detailed feather. That looks really cool. Let's see if there's going to be a tip for the seam line in the legs. It doesn't look like it, but there is a tip here for adding some filling parts. Just like that's kind of more like the typical way for filling in empty parts on the inside of like a hollow gap, like on those parts in the back skirt. It's just hollow there. So it's just kind of a mix of, looks like plot plate mostly. Plot plate on the top part there, and then the bottom part, the yellow that you can see, looks to be like it's just polyester putty, I believe, for that. And then painted. I do like the color here. You can see down below here the original color of the kit versus the painted color. The painted color does look really, really nice there on that. So nice coloring for that. We got the Garibaldi. Probably still my favorite kit of the series thus far. Really cool design and tons of gimmicks built into this thing. So you have like the arms come off, the parts on the back go onto the arms and make these beam hands. You've got the weapon, which separates into two different weapons separately. All kinds of different stuff here. Here's another really interesting technique here for the gap, for filling the gap on the bottom of the feet. So basically, he used a saw and cut off a thin layer of the bottom of the foot, so that will give you kind of like your outline of that piece there, and then put a piece of plot plate on the top of that to then just kind of seal that off. And then once that's glued and everything, you'll have to then cut around that to cut that out, and that'll give you just a flat bottom of the feet. You can take that part that you cut off and then glue that back onto there to make a kind of outline detail. And then he added a few more little parts in there as well for extra detail, and now he has a detailed bottom of the foot there. You can see the original versus his detailed one. That's another really cool idea for how to go about detailing the bottom of the feet. And then for me, it's just, for the bottom of the feet, it's just a part of the kit that you're just not ever gonna see. That just seems like a lot of work to put into that, a part of the kit that's not ever gonna be seen. But for this particular kit, yeah, if you are planning on having it with like the foot flying off like that, then yeah, it certainly looks better. So, I mean, it looks really good. But for me, it would have to be a part of the kit that I know is gonna be seen for me to go ahead and put that much work into it. But it does, you can't argue with the results. It definitely does look really good. All right, the Gundam Fire Act here up next. We got another kind of before and after image down here. Really beautiful. I mean, so far, all of these are really, really nice, really sharp, clean builds of these. So they look really good. I mean, they look like the production models. This one looks like it does have a little bit of shading and weathering on it here as well, which it unfortunately, not really too much in the way of work in progress. So like the first part for the aerial, we saw a lot of this kind of like tips, and on the other builds we haven't seen quite as much of that, unfortunately. I do kind of wish that they would have taken a few more pages on each of these builds to give some more tips on some of these. I'm sure, like I said, that there's probably some more good information in the text, but some more like step-by-step tips on this, because this looks like it's got some, like it's painted in a like pre-shading technique. It also has some dry brushing on there. It looks like on the parts is very, very subtle weathering, but just to make it kind of generally look that much better, you know, these subtleties of the pre-shading and the dry brushing on those parts will just make it look that much nicer. So it would have been cool if they would have included some kind of more tutorial about that, but here we have the Michaelis. I wonder if that's like a digital effect or if they're using some fluorescent paint, maybe something like that for those parts. Again, without more work in progress photos, it's kind of hard to tell, unfortunately, but again, really nice paint job here on this. I would assume that's probably, if that's not the stickers, it might just be the stickers, to be honest, because those stickers for that part, you know, do work pretty well, and especially if the theme of this is just kind of supposed to be like beginner finishes. I mean, I would just use the stickers if it was up to me, but that also might just be painted with some like metallic turquoise kind of paint. I'm not sure. Anyway, really nice looking build though, and I do like even like the attention to detail inside some of these kind of little recessed details around on some of the armor parts. I think that's on like the thigh armor there, for example, just painting that in kind of multiple colors there, it looks like. So really cool looking build there. We've got the aerial rebuild as well. So let's see what we've got going on with this. Another kind of like filling the gaps in some of the parts there, the ankle connection piece, the knee piece, the foot. So just filling in some of those hollow spaces on the kit. Let's see what else I can tell as I can glean from these images. Otherwise, I mean, it's just a nice painted build here of the aerial rebuild. You can see there is a bit of like plot plate detail work added. It looks like maybe on the inside and outside of a couple of these parts right there, inside of the shoulder part. And maybe like here around the knee, looks like. I'm not exactly sure. It's kind of hard to tell with that one. Oh, I think it's like a little detail. So it's like a recessed detail, and he added a little piece of plot plate inside that to kind of make it look like a separate kind of little part sticking up there. So like a button or like a key, if that makes sense as a way to like describe what that is. Oh yeah, and then down here you can see it's painted in that bright green, like a metallic green is what I mean to say it looks like. So just making that as a raised detail inside that kind of recessed shape. So you have like this gap, imagine like a recessed area like this, and then you have a little bit smaller piece of plot plate that you stick into there. So you still get like the outline of the shape, but then the actual center part is raised. You can paint it in whatever color you want. In this case, he painted that in that metallic green. All right, now for the Figurize standard kits here of Suletta and Murine. So let's see what we've got in store for these. So it looks like one of the things that we're gonna see here, we'll fast forward a bit. One of the things that we're gonna see is just how to put on the metallic stickers, or these are the metallic stickers, or yeah. Looks like you cut and modified these parts here for like the torso, for like the center part of the torso right here, because there's a seam line on this side. So in order to remove that seam line, he had to like modify these parts so that the black part, normally the black part of that would be sandwiched between the white parts, but he cut that so that the pegs would fit in to just fit it in the different way. So they could remove the seam lines on the white parts and then be able to paint it separately and then put it back together still. It looks like this is using kind of a guide for the water slides, and he's used a little bit of tape in between there to mark on the face, like for where the water slides go, to make sure that the eyebrows and the eyes are kind of evenly lined up. That's the difficult thing about doing eye decals, is just to get them in exactly the right position. It can be difficult. So, and especially if you only have one set of eye decals, if you don't have spares, and you don't have you don't have a ton of time to move the decal around. You can't like keep moving it. Eventually the decal is gonna start to break up on you. So you don't have a whole lot of time to be moving around to try to get it situated into the right spot. So making some sort of guide, whether it be using tape or like a little bit of pencil, will be difficult because then you have to try to erase the pencil once you got the decals on there. But using tape is a good way to make a guide for yourself as to where the decals are gonna go. Here's about just like removing the mold line on the bottom of the chin. There's a mold line there, so they just marked that off, and then you can just sand that away with either a sanding sponge or sandpaper or a sanding stick. If it's like a sponge, like a soft type sanding stick or whatever, it'd be a good way to just sand that mold line around on the kit. So once you have your decals on there, then putting some, I believe that would be some Mark Softer or something on there, just to make sure your decals are, nice and flat on there. Putting the metallic stickers on. using the Tamiya Weathering Master set. I've talked about this a couple times recently, how these Tamiya Weathering Master sets are typically for, like weathering, armor and stuff like that, but they do make a couple of sets that are specifically for skin tone, so these can be nice for adding, blush and highlights and things like that on your face parts or on your skin tone parts on your kits, so those can be good. Also, painting some details, looks like maybe added a bit, what is that? Kind of difficult to tell, but there's a couple of steps here that are interesting. So one is just like filling in the line around the lips. This one is using a toothpick, it looks like, to make this very subtle little white dot on the cheeks, and that's just to make like a highlight point. And then this one, I'm not exactly sure what this one is doing here on the eyes, but I think that's just adding some gloss coat. So you can just add a little bit of gloss coat with a brush just on the eyes, where the rest of the face you want it to be kind of satiny finish, but you want the eyes to have a nice glow or a nice gloss to them anyway, right? And here for the inside of the sleeves, just like painting that yellow, and then you can remove the yellow with a cotton swab or Q-tip, whatever there for that. Let's take a look at Murine up next. This one's using a knife and a file to sharpen the hair, so just to make the hair just to refine the detail a little bit more there on the hair. Removing the mold line around on the foot. There, the shovel is painted, so it's not just a single black piece like how it comes in the kit. It also looks like, I was gonna say made, but probably got these. That's probably some like just miniature set or something of like these miniature tomato plants there. So got some tomato plants and maybe just had to kind of scratch build sort of this part there for like the planter for those. All right, chapter 3 here. What are they going to cover in chapter 3? I'm not sure. Let's see. As we're getting to not much of the book left here. This is the Gundam Aerial Permit Score 6. So, I think this is just kind of getting into some advertising now. So this is the premium Bandai item here. The Permit Score 6 kit there of the HG Aerial. You got the weapon display base down there, the Aerial Rebuild, HG kit. So yeah, this is all just promotional images there just to sell the kits basically. The Lefrith, the Begerbu, the Delanza, but probably some cool information here. Again, like if you went through and actually like translated each of these little sections, probably just like interesting little information about some of these kit releases. So it's just nice to have as like a visual guide to the kits, because it has the box art on here as well. So you got the box art and you got a few different sample images and poses. I'm sure it's probably the same images that are like in the manual of the book, and they're just using those here for this, but still, like I said, a nice visual guide to the kits from the series thus far. Let's see, it goes up through the Lefrith Thorn, the Zor Heavy, the Lenza Soul. Oh wow, even through these ones, which I believe these ones are not even out yet. So we have some photos here of these kits. I think at the time of the release of this issue, the Delanza Soul would have been the most recent one. So we don't even have the box art for these other ones, the Hendry Storm, the Demi Barding, the Gundam Schwarzette, and the Gunvolva. Yes, very interesting name for that one, but right, yeah, we don't have box art for those, but we do have some images here. So there's a little bit of photos and information about some of those future releases. Other non-HG stuff, we got the Figurized kits there, of course, the SDX Standard Gundam Aerial here, Gundam decals, those are also available. And let's see, the full Mechanics Gundam Aerial here, of course, so we got the full 2-page spread here about that. And that's it. So we got the credits here at the end and another advertisement for Gundam Forward Mobile Suit Victory Gundam. I do not have that. Probably won't be getting that issue, but that is it for this Mook, guys. So I will say I do wish that there was more tutorial stuff in there. So there was a really good section at the front with some like basic tips, tutorial stuff, but then the rest of this was more of just kind of like a generally, just kind of showing off some nice builds of the kits, and there was like a few tips that you could kind of glean from the images and from the text like here and there, which are nice little tips. There was a lot of really cool tips in between stuff, but I do like the more detailed kind of overview that we saw at the beginning as well, just kind of step by step showing some of this stuff. I think is nice. So I do wish that there was a little bit more of this in on some of the later builds as well, if there was a kind of a better mix. Honestly, I really like everything that's in here, so there's not like I would say, you know, do away with some of this stuff. So I just wish that this Mook was maybe a little bit thicker. If they would have added, you know, maybe 10, 15 pages more of some more of this tutorial type pages like this, I think would have been really nice. Otherwise, it's a great Mook. Yeah, great little Mook here if you're a fan of the Witch from Mercury kits, especially if you're a beginner. But, you know, like I was saying, even if you're not a beginner, there's definitely some cool stuff that you can still learn from Mooks like this. So check it out, guys. If you want to check out some of the kits for yourself, you can do that here at USA Gundam Store. I'll have the link down in the video description. Check that out. We got all the kits and decals, tools, supplies, paints, everything that you guys might need. So check out USA Gundam Store in the video description link. And as always, guys, thank you so much for your support, liking the video, commenting, subscribing, all that stuff. I really appreciate it. If you guys want to make sure that you stay tuned for future Mook reviews and everything else, just make sure that you're subscribed. Really appreciate it, guys. Until next time, guys, have a great day. See y'all later. Bye.